So NPR released an article that I read this morning entitled "Private Mission to Save the Hubble Space Telescope Raises Concerns, NASA Emails Show." Which, exciting, right? So of course I read it. So this article came out yesterday on May 16th when I was taking a statistical mechanics final. So that was an absolute shit show. But anyway, unrelated to that. And it's about a rich private astronaut, Jared Isaacman, proposing a mission to restore and potentially upgrade the Hubble Space Telescope by a space mission funded by himself and launched with SpaceX. NASA seems hesitant to agree to this offer, so let's kind of get into what's going on. If you're new, my name is Elle, and I'm an astrophysics PhD student. I'm finishing up my first year. It's so exciting. Although I do have a degree and a half already in astrophysics, so there's that. And I have an interest in how the landscape of the federal government space science and private space science is changing. I've just been very interested in it. I think a lot of people have, especially with, seemingly everyone with millions of dollars being like, I can go to space. Why shouldn't I? And then me also being a person trying to pursue a job kind of in these areas. The idea of doing astrophysics for a private industry is kind of new. It's exciting and it's terrifying. It's a lot, as any new market is, right? So that's my intro. The other thing is that I've done these astrophysics reacts before, or Astrophysicist Explains. Is that what I said? I've done both. And usually I do more this is me doing science or talking about science more hardcore, and this is more of me sharing an interesting news article with the context of being an astrophysicist. So this is a little new and different. So I guess I'll apologize. Also, my notes are really long, so we'll see how long this actually takes us to get through. Part 1, the inciting issue. Of course, why is this guy saying all this stuff? What's going on? So, the Hubble Space Telescope, which I'm going to be referring to as HST, just so you know, is a telescope that was launched into low Earth orbit on April of 1990. So, it's 34. Happy birthday. Almost. It's a month late, but roughly. I don't know when a telescope's birthday would be. Would it be the day it got launched or the day it got, created? Well, I guess my birthday is the day I got launched, right? Because the pregnancy was when I was being created. So I would say the day it launched is its birthday. Sure. We'll say that. Yeah. Okay. Now that we've gotten past that. This telescope was equipped with several tools that makes it good for general astronomy, meaning that it's not limited to something that's just planetary science or stellar spectra or galactic observations. A lot of space missions tend to be really specific. So spacecraft like Cassini, the Cassini space mission was a spacecraft that was designed to go to Saturn, fly around it, look at the planet's surface. The TESS mission is to specifically look at transits of exoplanets. It's a survey that's just looking for transits of exoplanets. So there's a lot of spacecraft telescopes that are built with a very specific goal in mind, with very specific equipment on board. And so Hubble is good and interesting and well loved because it has a lot of general things on it that allows for all sorts of astronomy to be done on it, which is why it's very popular, hard to get telescope time, because you as maybe a stellar spectra type of researcher now have to be waiting in line where someone else might be more interested in the infrared aspect of something, and you're oh my god, 2 different instruments, same telescope, all the same time. Proposals must be a nightmare to read. I hope I'm never on a Hubble tack. That's just what's a tack? How do I explain that? The people who they read all the proposals and tell you if you get time. No thank you. Like all things, it cannot run perfectly forever, which has given NASA a reason to launch 5 separate missions to repair, update, service the craft during its lifetime. with the last mission to service HST being 15 years ago. So this is all according to the NPR article. I didn't decide to like fact check them, but I did kind of cursory look over some of the NASA articles, which seem to back this up. That being said, gravity is still a factor. It's in the low Earth orbit, but gravity still affects it, and the telescope is slowly orbiting lower and lower in that low Earth orbit, and the estimated time, like lifetime of HST's orbit being like stable is about 10 years. So in about 10 years, they're like, well, it's just going to be so low, it's going to fall into the atmosphere and crash into the Earth. We know this. It's not unexpected. I'm fairly certain the people who probably designed Hubble and are probably still working on it have been aware of this for very long, like a very long time. Like, these things don't tend to show up last second. This isn't due to a fault of the design. It's just nature. It's just how it works. I just want to keep that in mind because this is like not as shocking as it might feel. Okay. So then the situation gets more interesting because Jared Isaacman, rich entrepreneur, as he is referred to in the article, which is what a title, has proposed to go on a space mission with SpaceX to do necessary repairs and potential upgrades to HST on his own dollar. He claims that his goal is just to save HST and extend its life. It sounds good. But we're gonna get into it. So who the hell is Jared Isaacman? Yeah, if you're like me, you're like, who is this guy? What are you talking about? So he is another one of the many rich guys that wants to be in space. So check that out. But more specifically, he is the CEO of a company called Shift4 Payments, which is a point of sale service for like retail payments. And another company called Draken International. Some of the I don't know, it's always funny when they're like CEO of something silly. Anyway, but Draken International is a company that trains pilots for the US Armed Forces, which I also didn't know that the US Armed Forces don't train their own pilots. They like outsource that to a company. But the more you know. The fucking military-industrial complex is real, so, like, not that surprised. But, so he himself is a pilot, and he really seems to love, like, aeronautics, like, as a whole. Partially with him opening this, like, we train fighter pilots company. He's a pilot. He was, like, doing, like, air shows. Like, he was, like, a seemingly accomplished pilot. I don't know what counts as accomplishment in terms of piloting, but he was a pilot and could fly an airplane, amongst other things. I guess a spaceship, too. He has a bachelor's degree in professional aeronautics. And so I didn't know what professional aeronautics degree was. At first I read it, and I read, like, when you do the engineering, like aeronautic engineering, aerodynamic engineering, I thought it was something like that, but I looked it up, and it's more like a degree that familiarizes you with aircraft as a whole, like how, like on the procedural side, like how to fly, what safety procedures are, like you learn about airplanes in the sense that you're learning about a thing and not like the concept of flight. It seems like, I'm sure they go over it a little bit. It would blow my mind if there wasn't at least one class it's like, here's how an airplane flies. But it's not like an engineering degree, it's more of like airplane degree. I'm saying that wrong. I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to shit on this degree. I just, I've never heard of it, and it's hard for me to explain. So, but yeah, it seems like a little part of the degree is kind of focused around the concept of design and engineering, but it seems like a very small part of it. I only know this information because I looked up professional aeronautics degree on Google, and the college that he went to was the only thing that popped up for me. And I was just reading through, like, you know, where it's like, oh, when you look up a degree at a college, they usually tell you, like, here's the curriculum we offer. And so that's where I'm pulling this information from. And the other information I'm pulling from Wikipedia. So there's that. There's always a chance it could be wrong, but who knows? So in 2021, he was the commander of Inspiration 4, which, you know, like his company's called Shift 4, and now his space thing is called Inspiration 4. Also, I'm saying like Inspiration number 4, not like FOR, or it's very silly. It looks stupid, but okay. So he was the commander of Inspiration 4, which was the first private human spaceflight mission conducted, which means that there were no people on the mission who are associated with a government agency. So there's no like military pilots, NASA people, you know, any of those government of agencies we all love and hate. I don't know. Both. We all know about. The Inspiration mission was operated by SpaceX. He is also expected to command the upcoming Polaris Dawn mission, whose goal, it seems, is to stay in space for 5 days to do what Wikipedia says are, these are my quotes, science and research experiments to study the effects of spaceflight and space radiation on human health. And this mission is planned to launch in the mid-2024 after being delayed for a few times already. This mission is planned to launch mid-2024 after it's already been delayed a few times. The last date it was supposed to launch was April, like last month. But they pushed it to mid-2024, so who knows? It might happen. So going back to this article, now that we know who Jared Isaacman is, what are NASA's concerns? Like, why not? Isn't it a good thing that this well-to-do private citizen is willing to spend a fraction of his billions of dollars to help poor old NASA? Like, doesn't that sound like a sweet deal? Like, to help the poor old scientific community? So here's where it gets a little bit dramatic, okay? Everybody grab your teacups, grab your saucers, because we're gonna fucking get into it, okay? I'm excited. So first off, I want to say that Isaacman apparently approached NASA in 2022. 2022 was also like roughly when he started, right after he did his first space mission, so I imagine he's chock full of confidence at being a spaceman now. So he approached NASA in 2022 about this, and they've been thinking about it and looking into the logistics of this like project for about 2 years. So this isn't like brand new information. This is something that they've been thinking about. It's been in progress for a while. So NASA hasn't said no, but they haven't said yes. Which is why I think Isaacman is getting a little antsy on the answer, because his Polaris Dawn mission is supposed to launch somewhere in the next few months. And he still hasn't got an answer from NASA, and they asked them 2 years ago. So purely speculating, this is not necessarily from the article, this is just me being catty. The mission was supposed to launch last month, but was rescheduled, and I'm really curious if Isaacman delayed the launch to wait for a green light from NASA to like let him go do Hubble Space Telescope stuff. I don't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a part of it. I mean, I think SpaceX has also come out saying, we need time to develop our things so people don't crash, which I'm like, why did you plan a space mission if you need time to develop the technology? Just don't plan it. But anyway, I'm not getting into it. I have a lot of opinions about SpaceX in particular. They're not all bad. They're not all bad, but I have a lot, and I think they might come through, as if they haven't already. So as you can expect, NASA has some serious concerns with letting non-NASA people handle their $16 billion spacecraft. The idea is commendable, right? I think so, and so does an Andrew Fustel, who is a part of 3 spacewalks to refurbish HST. So this guy Fustel, he's a big part of the article, and they quote him a lot. And so, yeah, we think it's a good idea that he's like, I just want to extend the life of HST. I just want to spend all my money to do this. Like, great idea. Cool. The goals are good, and I think NASA is underfunded, and I really support people with big money to give it to science goals and scientists. I think it's like a worthwhile investment. Is that a self-serving desire? You fucking bet your ass, dude. I need money, but you know, that's okay. I'm allowed to be self-serving every once in a while. I can have hopes and dreams. So what's kind of murky specifically? They have concerns, but like about what? I made a numbered list of 6 things that I could kind of like boil this article down to what their concerns are. Number 1, SpaceX does not have the technological history or specifications to perform NASA-style space missions. So, according to the article, SpaceX has only just developed spacewalk suits, and they have not been tested yet, or at least not nearly as tested as the spacesuits that NASA has been developing since the 1960s. Like, keep in mind, the moon landing, like humans from like NASA-based humans being put on the moon, they touched the moon in 1969. The development of all that stuff happened throughout the 60s, maybe in the late 50s. Like, so the development time, and then, you know, we've just been continuously developing it. Like, maybe not at the rate of the space race, but like, there's a lot of development time. SpaceX has just developed spacewalk suits. The SpaceX spacesuit was only revealed this month as of, and if you're watching this in the future, May 2024, according to the article. So, this makes some people at NASA worried because there's no evidence that shows that SpaceX can perform a task like doing service on the Hubble Space Telescope. This is one of those situations where no evidence can be taken either way. Like, you don't have any evidence that it will work, you don't have any evidence that it won't work. But with space missions, especially human space missions, proven evidence that things work the way they are supposed to is very crucial in getting greenlit. It's like a really key point in like trying to ensure that your rocket doesn't like burn up and kill everyone as it's leaving the atmosphere, you know, just things like that. Like, maybe show that your spacesuit works in space before we just let you touch our $16 billion spacecraft. Again, I feel like the goals aren't that crazy. Number 2, HST is fine. Yeah, so the biggest thing on NASA's radar about Hubble is that it's functioning very well. Like, there's nothing wrong with the Hubble Space Telescope right now. It's like, it's working really well. It's just, you know, living its life. It's said to be in good health and there aren't any issues with it functioning or gathering data. So it doesn't seem like it's worth the risk to like jeopardize its good health by letting people try to maneuver a spacecraft close to it and then start fiddling around with its insides. So looking up the HST proposal windows, I was just curious to see like if there was anything interesting there. The deadline for cycle 32 to get time on the Hubble Space Telescope, the next cycle is cycle 32. The observing window for cycle 32 is between October 1st of this year, 2024, all the way to September 30th of 2025. The deadline just passed in March 26th. And HST is a telescope that is over-requested, meaning that there are more people that request time on the scope than there is available time. So during this window that I just gave you from October to September, it's pretty much going to be constantly working, like the whole time. And so if they're making decisions on cycle 32 proposals and budgets right now, and over the next few months, because this is the window when that happens, HST must be fine. Like, if they're like, oh, you want time in, like, January of 2025? No problem! That's not an issue for us. So, like, no one on the proposal team or anyone is like, oh, we need to, like, stop for maintenance. They're just fine. I'd also like to point out that even if something were going wrong with HST due to wear and tear, that doesn't make it unviable for observational purposes. There have been other space missions that have had major malfunctions with mechanisms involving pointing, like, you know, letting it angle itself, that still have yielded good science results. And I'm talking about Kepler. I'm talking about the Kepler mission. The Kepler mission basically had like a 3-motor like pointing system. One of the motors blew out. They're like, that's fine. You really only need 2. Another motor blew out, and then it was just like unable to point. But they were able to work with it, do some on-the-fly stuff, figure it out. So Aside from HST falling to the earth, it'll probably be used until something like crazy happens. Like if it got like half of it blow up or something. Like you can, especially like space telescope scientists, like you really work with what you've got. Even if it's like, okay, it's not perfect, that's never really been an issue. HST has had a history of having a gyroscope problem, I think, but it's never been an issue to the point where they were like, we can't use it. So it's healthy, it's fine. Even if it were like a little sick, a little crippled, scientists would still love it and it would not be an issue. Like literally, unless it like can't open or can't transmit data, then like that's the only thing that would really stop us from using it. Number 3, they can't stay in space long enough. Hubble tech and servicing expert Edward Chung describes in the article that astronauts are usually in space for about a week when servicing HST. Apparently, commercial spaceflight is currently incapable of remaining in space for such a duration, which would severely limit how much time they'd have to work on a rather delicate piece of machinery. That seems like a huge one for me, like a huge concern, is that they're like, oh, we've been in space for 3 days, and they're like, well, we need you to be there for a minimum of a week. Anyway, brings us to part 4. Topic 4, concern number 4. SpaceX shuttles don't have airlocks. SpaceX shuttles don't have airlocks. Okay, sorry. This is a smaller issue, I think, in the scope of NASA's concerns, but this, like, blew my mind when I read it, because, what? Apparently, SpaceX shuttles do not currently have airlocks, so when and if the doors were to be opened to do a spacewalk, the entire craft becomes depressurized. Which is just, from a design standpoint, I'm shocked. I was really blown away by that. To be fair, SpaceX missions have never done a spacewalk before. The first spacewalk ever to happen is supposedly in the summer of this summer coming up. So it hasn't been an issue yet. I'm just still like, you didn't put an airlock on your spaceship? What do I know? I'm just a physics guy, okay? Back to this. For a mission that requires so much time, like a week, like they said, and the ability to perform a spacewalk, this is kind of crazy, right? Like, your shuttles can't stay in space for 7 days, and you don't have airlocks, so you can't do a spacewalk. So, it was also mentioned that, like, SpaceX shuttles don't have robotic arms on their crafts, which is another tool that, like, they rely on when servicing the HST. Like, they need a robotic arm to, like, grab onto the telescope to, like, maneuver it so the, like, astronauts can, like, move around it and get into the all parts they need to. So they don't have that. An alternative to the airlock that SpaceX has developed is a pod structure that they call a Skywalker, which supposedly just links up to the shuttle and acts like an airlock. Like, it's like a little pod that you would then get into, and it's pressurized, and then it depressurizes, and you can go out and do a spacewalk, and then it's like, I don't know why it's modular, not just part of the ship, but that's what they have developed to get around this airlock thing, and this is planned to be tested during the first Polaris Project spacewalk this summer. So it's never been tested. They're testing the spacesuits, they're testing this Skywalker pod, and they're testing whether they could do a spacewalk all at the same time, which seems scary. It's very scary to think about. That's a lot of testing. It's a lot of hope. A lot of dreams. Number 5 is, quote, SpaceX's view of risks and willingness to accept risk is considerably different than NASA's, end quote. Dana Wagle, NASA's program manager for the ISS said the previous quote about the different risk acceptance between NASA and SpaceX before sharing concerns about the new, untested spacesuits that SpaceX and Jared Isaacman are willing to pin this mission on. While you may have a potentially negative view of NASA for any number of reasons, I understand that NASA is a government agency and some people have distrust about things like that. Also, it's a science agency and people have distrust about things like that. I really do think that NASA is very aware and conscious of how dangerous space missions are and how important it is to have things thoroughly tested before moving along with projects. Like, I do think that's a big concern of theirs regarding space missions. I mean, because there's the risk of human life, potentially, astronauts, but also taxpayer dollars, right? For example, if someone crashed into the, Hubble Space Telescope, that's $16 billion of taxpayer money that just got lost. Also, you pay to use the telescope, so I'm sure that's funding something. But anyway, they're really aware of, risks like this. So, the Columbia and Challenger missions were NASA missions that were very disastrous, and spacewalks themselves are not in the range of perfectly safe, as we are, where we are technologically. A NASA study quoted in the article said that out of 400 spacewalks since 1965, which again, that's a pretty big data set, 22% were met with serious incidents and or close calls. And that's just the ones that were 22% said they were serious incidents. There was a comment that most spacewalks run into some kind of issue. One of the serious incidents that was mentioned was that apparently during a spacewalk in 2013, one of the astronauts' helmets started filling with water for some reason. I didn't look into why, but that's crazy. Can you imagine drowning in space? So NASA has had hundreds of walks to take data on the risks and are weary of openly allowing or encouraging private citizens from taking such risks on their behalf. Right? Because this isn't just oh, I'm at the store, do you want anything? Of space. This is more if NASA gives him the okay to do this, this is the federal government encouraging a private citizen to risk his life on behalf of a federal project. There is a level of legality, power, that's just, it mixes it up a little bit. So just keep that in mind too. This is a private citizen. He's a rich person, so it feels like he's not a real person, but he is just a regular guy, technically. With billions of dollars. Number 6, Hubble is delicate and hard to get close to. So according to Scott Scooter Altman, great name, astronaut who commanded 2 missions to HST, it is difficult to get close to HST without damaging it. It isn't like going to the International Space Station, which is set up with assistance devices to aid incoming crafts, assess parameters like what their incoming velocity is and how exactly how far away they are. So HST has these solar panels sticking off the side. If you've ever seen a picture of it, I should put a picture on the screen. And that would be absolutely detrimental if they got damaged in any way. And they're kind of hard to navigate around. The risk of crashing in the HST is very high, which would also take the telescope out of commission if you crashed into it. So this is where shuttles would usually use a robotic arm to help maneuver the telescope. So the arm essentially grabs HST and kind of moves it around so that the astronauts don't have to necessarily be moving too much in case they bump into something. There's stuff sticking off of it too. It's not a perfect tube or anything. There's a lot of things around it. But again, SpaceX does not have this robotic arm, so they would be working without that. NASA astronauts also have a special anchoring system so that the engineers are not floating while working. It's their feet are anchored to HST, to the telescope, so they can grab stuff and maneuver without floating away. And again, SpaceX does not have this anchoring system. So as for the actual work being done on HST, those who have worked on it in the past describe how difficult it is to do servicing on this machine. Even routine maintenance is very risky. A lot of the engineers feel very personally responsible for potentially being able to kill Hubble. Like, there's this story of this one guy who was working, like, he was servicing HST, and his foot slipped, and he knocked the end of an antenna off, and he was, like, so upset because he didn't know if that was gonna be, like, the make or break thing. It turns out it was absolutely fine. It didn't affect anything, but he was like, the stress of being in space and being like, oh, I bumped something, and then, you know, floats off into space forever, is very nerve-wracking. Not that I'm saying that the Polaris team, SpaceX team, is gonna feel that same level of personal responsibility, because I have no way of knowing that, but, like, these people who are highly trained for this very specific mission still find it incredibly difficult. Even things like, there's stories of them talking about how, like, getting bolts off to get into the machinery can be difficult. So it's not just, like, the finer mechanical details, but, like, every aspect of this mission is very difficult to do. I would like to juxtapose this idea and these experiences that have been shared by these, like, NASA engineers with this quote from Isaacman, who described adding new tech to HST as, quote, potentially just plugging in a couple cables here. So he's referring to the potential new hardware that could be added, if built with mechanisms that could dock with Hubble. But it seems like he's either way too casual about this, or he doesn't understand the risks. It's really hard to say. Like, I can't tell if this is him being, like, a little sarcastic, like, when I go in, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna get a PhD, like, it's just something you buy at the store, even though I know the difficulty of, like, obtaining this type of degree, or if he's like, I actually just think we're plugging in cables, so what's the big deal? Reading comments from this man and hearing quotes from him, I just don't have a good vibe. I just, like, cannot tell if he's being sarcastic or not. I kind of hope he's being maybe, like, a little bit of a troll and being like, oh, what's the big deal, but, like, knows what's going on. Like, I really hope that I'm just misinterpreting it, but I'm really afraid that I'm not. So those are the biggest concerns that NASA has about this collaboration, and I think their concerns are valid, which is why they've been undergoing and plan to undergo even more testing to see if this is viable. So they're not saying no, but they're not saying yes. They're just like, interesting, let's do some tests to see if this is gonna work out for us. And that's the state NASA is in. Like, they have not said no, they have not said yes. I think this is a cool idea, especially when someone comes around with the funding to back it up. There are plenty of NASA people in the article that are charmed by the idea of Isaacman funding a project to help Hubble. But it seems like Isaacman and SpaceX are getting a little ahead of themselves when it comes to promises, their own technological advancements, and perceived skills. There is a struggle between two worlds that are very different happening in this situation, and the worlds are research, academia, and business. So business innovation, the goal is to produce something first, right? To improve on it later. It's about making your space in the market for whatever you're trying to profit off of. You know, I made the first smartphone. I made the first jetpack. I don't know. It's probably someone. I'm the first commercial spaceflight airline. You know, things like that. In academia, the goal is to be right. So to never be disproven, to discover, and to make claims that are replicable. So it's more about going slow and doing it well rather than doing it first. Overall, there's crossover. Of course, there are businesses that work really hard to ensure that their products are like non-toxic to humans before releasing. You know, like I think of like the cosmetics industry and stuff like that. Like when cosmetics industry people, like a company, is like found to have like something poisonous in their makeup, it's usually a really big deal because it's like you were supposed to make sure it was safe and you rushed. So there's not that there's like no rules for business and all rules for academia. Similarly, there are scientists that publish on dubious evidence like, to be the first paper on the subject. There is definitely, like, you know, people who find a way around the peer review system and things like that. Usually they're caught and regarded as, like, scum and can ruin their careers for doing such things, but it's not unheard of, especially publishing first on something like, oh, we think we saw a signal, I'm going to publish it without checking. Like, that's a really big risk. It's a really big thing that happens. But the goal overall, again, is to be right, to be replicable, and to discover something new. So if you can be disproven, it's really embarrassing and everyone hates you. Or so I'm told. It's never happened to me yet. No, I'm just kidding. It will never happen to me. I'm always gonna be right. Gotta have that confidence. But I think this dichotomy is what is getting in between some of the collaboration between NASA and SpaceX. The other thing that I think strains the relationship is personal ego and attitudes from both sides. So in this article, I didn't find a lot of evidence via quotes from of like really intense attitude on the NASA side, but there was a lot of attitude coming from Jared Isaacman. While what he's offering sounds entirely wholesome and philanthropic, the attitude around the potential that NASA says no makes him sound like a guy who got turned down by a person he was asking out, only to turn around and say something like, "Oh, people just don't want to date nice guys." Like, that's the attitude. He wants an answer from NASA and claims that the situation is a no-brainer and that this should be an easy risk-reward decision. These are quotes, by the way. Quotes I stole from the article who stole it from his mouth. He has stressed that they need to make a decision soon because of Hubble's orbital clock running out. Right now, NASA isn't too concerned about Hubble falling to Earth. Again, they're like, we have 10 years, calm down. Because there are a number of options that they have already about what to do when the time comes. So one is to let it fall and hope that the parts that don't burn up in the atmosphere fall in the ocean. Because there are parts of the Hubble Space Telescope that, I think they said the primary mirror and a few other parts that will not burn up in the atmosphere. So there will be some, like, pieces landing on the Earth. And so they're like, just hope it lands in the ocean. There's a high chance of it landing in the ocean, just like due to surface coverage of ocean to land on our planet and things like that. So there's a high chance that'll happen. It'll be fine. In case you're like, oh my god, that's negligent. It's really, like, statistically solid. It's a solid idea. Another is to do the same thing, but right before it falls, undergo a mission to attach a booster to HST so that it can be placed over the ocean before it falls, just so we can ensure that it falls into the ocean, it doesn't fall into land. And then there was also some voices saying that right now the risk to touch and go to HST is not viable, but maybe they'll revisit it in a few years and see if they can get money from Congress to do so. Because that's how NASA works. They're like, if we need money, we can just go ask the government for money and then perform our own space mission, where we have people who've been doing Hubble space missions for years and years and years working on it, instead of just some random guy who has a lot of money. But anyway, so Isaacman's comments towards NASA's indecision are as follows, and I just have to be honest with you, I'm gonna try to be really not catty, but, like, these are kind of hard for me to read. I think they're very entitled and, like, I'm the victim. It's very weird. It's a very strange, like, way to interact. So I'm gonna read these quotes. Sorry. I just had to preface what's going on. Up until now, there's only been, one group that would ever touch Hubble, and I think they have an opinion of whether or who should or shouldn't be allowed to touch it. I think a lot would say, I'd rather it burn up than, go down the slippery slope of, the space community growing. So I think that's a factor now, unfortunately. Okay, there was too much sass in my voice. That's my voice acting coming out, sorry. But there's just, like, I don't know. I hope you can hear it. I would encourage you to read the article and maybe, like, come back and see how you feel, because after reading so many quotes from this guy, I feel like that's how he said it, even though I did not want to even go see where this came from. Because reading it was too hard. I don't want to hear it. His regards to the concern for human lives that NASA has presented are as such. that risk is being taken no matter what. I would say, like, this is beyond logical. This is so obvious to do, and if it's not, it's purely political on why it wouldn't be done. So there's like another aspect of him being like, if I don't get to do this, it's political. If they say no to me, it's like because they're just like too jealous, like they're too like keeping their secrets too close, like they just don't want to care about other people, is like kind of like the arguments he's been making against NASA for the potential that he doesn't get to work on the Hubble Space Telescope. And I just don't understand it in a way. I don't get, like, it's the government's not telling him he can't go to space. The government's not telling him he can't fly airplanes. He literally can go to space. He can do all of his crazy stuff. They're just like, I'm concerned about you playing with our $16 billion toy. And they haven't even said no. They're just like, there's some things to think about here first. And he's like, so offended by the idea that like he might not be able to play with the Hubble Space Telescope. Like, at this point, get your rich buddies together whenever you're at, I don't know, rich boy luncheons or whatever you're doing, like, and just be like, hey boys, what if we like built our own space telescope and like launched it, whatever, and then like made a bunch of money off of the proposals. And, like, I get to go up there whenever I want and fucking touch it. Okay? Like, just do that. Like, literally no one's stopping you. Also, it seems like it might be freaking easier for you to just go make your own freaking telescope than, like, try to get in on NASA. He's trying to buy into NASA's goodwill, and NASA's like, hold on, we have some regulations. And he's kind of, like, he's just like, oh, I can't, you know who I am? Like, a little bit, right? Like, if they don't let me in, it's political. They're concerned you're gonna freaking die, dude. Like, you've never done a spacewalk, and you're like, I can go fix Hubble Space Telescope. Like, they're like, show me the fucking evidence. And yet, when he's asked for the evidence, he's just like, trust me, trust me, trust me. And I'm kind of on the NASA side with, like, this whole, like, what? Why? Like, why would I trust you? Like, you went to space for 3 days once. You just went up and then you went down. Like, that doesn't really mean you can, like, handle an engineering space mission on a very expensive federal object. Right? Like, those don't quite equate. I'm sure you could fly there because you seem like a pilot. But, like, I don't know. What other credentials do you have? Like, essentially none. You don't seem to want to work with any of the people, but, like, okay. I'm really heated about this freaking article, and so I'm trying to, like, I need to calm down. I have a actually written, like, outro. I'm gonna say that right now. This is why I have to write this down, because I will go off. So, how do we end this conversation? I'm not sure. I am interested in seeing how private space missions progress in the future, and, like, I'm gonna keep an eye out to see about this Hubble Space Telescope project goes anywhere, because I'm just very curious if they say yes, like, what the conditions are, like, what's going on. So hopefully there's news about it. But I'm more on the side of being overly cautious with things like space travel than caution to the wind YOLO about it. And so I agree with the concerns that NASA has about these missions. Like, especially as I listed them out and was, like, going through the reasoning behind them, I was like, oh yeah, this seems like a huge red flag. Right? Like, we don't have an airlock on our freaking space shuttle, and I have never been in space for more than we've never been in space more than 3 days, so how am I going to be up there for a week? Great questions! These are good questions! I do wish that Isaacman would be a little more courteous to, like, the tradition of those who have worked and been working on Hubble for decades, and maybe include them more in the planning of such things. Like, it seems like he's kind of willing to, like, write off the NASA people, when, like, a lot of the people involved with, and I don't know this, like, from the article, but, like, personally working at a NASA site, like, NASA people hang around. Like, once you're in NASA, especially if you're working on a big project like this, you pretty much are there for, like, ever, unless something crazy happens. So I'm pretty sure, like, probably the people who were first proposed Hubble, designed Hubble, built it with their own hands, watched it launch, planned all these service missions, work on it with software right now. Like, these people are around. These people are available. I mean, it launched in 1990, so, like, it's not even, like, that old. Like, even if someone was, like, 30 when all that stuff was happening, they're, like, 50 now, so, like, it's not that crazy. And I do kind of wish he was, like, more inclined to work with these people, because, like, a lot of, like, even in the article, there were people who were, like, long-term Hubble project people who were like, I would love more funding to go to my project. I would love for this to work. We just need to figure out the kinks. I'm worried that Isaacman is, like, not inclined to listen to feedback and will just be like, then I just won't do it. Or, like, whatever. Like, and I don't like that he's dangling this, like, big ability to do funding over something that seems like a really worthwhile project, personally. Speculatively. I do think it's good that he wants to fund a space project that would benefit the scientific community as a whole. When writing a proposal for the National Science Foundation, for the NSF, which I've only written, like, one real one. No, I wrote two. The proposal has to address two things: intellectual merit and broader impacts, okay? So if I use this metric to look at this issue, I feel that the goal has a lot of broader impact potential. It brings a lot of people into the space mission, like all of these. He has, like, a team of like private astronauts who are willing to go do this. So it brings them into it. It brings whoever's working at SpaceX and developing all the SpaceX stuff into it. Like, it's bringing a lot of more people into the space mission. And it increases the inclusion of citizen science, because arguably, I would say SpaceX is almost like citizen science, because citizen science is, like, science done by, like, non-affiliated peoples, right? Even though it's with a company, so that makes it a little wrinkly, but it's essentially, like, including more citizen science. So there's, like, it's got a lot there, but it just doesn't have the intellectual merit to really warrant the project. Like I said, HST is fine. It has no problems, and NASA has plans for what to do when it starts falling. Like, whether he likes them or not, there are plans. And I'll even bet that there is some emergency funding tucked away somewhere that can be used in the case that they really need to go do something on Hubble at a moment's notice, so I'm not really worried about it. That's the thing. That's the whatever. The intellectual merit of being like, I need to go fix something that isn't broken and it might break it by going to fix it, is risky. And I don't know if it's worth it, because it seems there's so many risks involved, and this is kind of why I get stressed out about, like, risk management in terms of proposals, especially related to, like, science and, like, writing a scientific proposal. It can get really big and abstract, and I've only ever written proposals for, like, small telescopes or little grants, like, nothing crazy, and it's still hard to be like, okay, well, how if the nights you have on this telescope are cloudy, how are you going to get around that? Because it costs $16,000 a night. So what are you going to do? Those are the types of risks you have to worry about, especially with, and I'm not quite familiar. I might look into this in the future. I don't know. So when you propose to get time on a telescope and you win, you have to pay them some amount. And usually it's like usually telescopes are on Earth, and so it's like a per night cost. I know with Hubble Space Telescope, it's a per cycle cost, because they have the telescope goes around the Earth, right? And so that's the cycle that they're like, okay, you have it for 90 minutes is one cycle, I think. It's like I don't remember. But, like, so you have it for a period of time. And that's like usually they're just like, oh, it's, like $50,000 a night, $50,000 a cycle. That's like the process. And I mean, the researchers themselves aren't usually paying it. It's usually whoever gives them grant money that grant money goes to telescope time. It feels like everyone's just passing money to everyone else and no one actually has it. But I am curious about whether the, like, when I pay the telescope, that money, theoretically, is now in the hands of the observatory that is taking care of that telescope to potentially fund things like repairs, keeping your staff paid, you know, things like that. So, with Hubble Space Telescope being so popular, the risk of it being destroyed or becoming unusable, or like even one instrument becoming like ineffective, could severely limit how much that like the observatory like makes off of it. It could make it to the point where it's like, oh, we have to shut the whole project down because we can't fund the people watching it. I don't know exactly, but like that's another level of risk that this telescope becoming damaged poses, is that it's like it really could affect quite a lot of people in the event that it doesn't work. Because for real, like the scientists that are using it to observe will probably just go to JWST, the other space telescope that's actually a little bit nicer. So like it won't affect the research as much as it'll affect like people working at the observatory, the federal government, like taxpayers, the potential of NASA ever getting funding for something like this in the future. Like that's the type of risks that it poses on like a more human scale. So that's that. It's, I don't know, it's like kind of a weird topic, right? Where do these rules? To be fair, I also think it's fair personally that NASA is like careful about who can interact with Hubble, because again, it's theirs. They're like, we created, it's like their whole baby, and this guy's like, why can't you let me like take your kid to the fucking park? What's the deal? And it's kind of like, but it's theirs. Like even if he's completely justified in wanting to give them money and help, but like not like by giving them money so they can do it themselves, I think they have a right as the federal government to say no and be like, no, we're just going to keep it internal. I know in telescope like circles, people who develop telescopes, almost every telescope is unique. Like in terms of like big research telescopes, almost every telescope is like entirely unique. And so the people who work on designing and creating the telescopes tend to have a lot to say about what goes on it, who's allowed to touch it, things like that. Like even on like, not even like in the space telescope world, but just like on Earth-based telescopes, like on Kitt Peak or Mauna Kea, like they're like really sensitive about it. It's a very like sensitive topic, and again, that's where I'm like, I don't know if this guy coming from the business world is aware of the culture that is kind of cropped up around telescope development and like servicing, because they're very expensive to build. They are unique. Like almost everything on it, most telescopes are developed by hand. There's almost nothing that's like, oh, I bought a camera and I bought a mirror and I just put them together. They're like, no, I had to design a camera, build it, like get like 500 people to work on this and get 500 people to work on that. And then we had to like risk it by pulling all these universities together and driving all these pieces together up a mountain and assembling it. And it's like a huge like undertaking. But like it honestly takes like 15 years to get build some telescopes or more. Again, just on Earth before you run the risk of potentially launching it to space. So there's a lot here that I'm not quite sure how much this guy, this rich man, like actually understands about the culture of science, the culture of astronomy, the risks involved, and who is facing these risks. And like just being told no, it just kind of also gives me the like vibe of like a child being like, well, I'm bigger than you, so like you should just do whatever I want. Like I don't know, it feels very like you can't say no to me, or I've never heard no before, and I don't understand that either. I just don't get it. Like, sometimes people will say no, even if it's like a good thing. So I just wish this guy was like cooler. I get like big skeevy vibes, and honestly, I'm probably not gonna think of this guy in a positive light, unless I like really see him be like really nice about something, because he's just kind of giving me baby Elon Musk vibes, or he's just like, oh, I know everything. But that's it for today. This got really long, so I apologize. My science videos have been kind of short, and I've been trying to keep them short. I do like hearing your thoughts in the comments, but please be kind to others. I'm gonna put the references in the description box, and just to be extra clear, this article is an NPR article entitled "Private Mission to Save the Hubble Space Telescope Raises Concerns, NASA Emails Show" by Nell Greenfield Boyce. Greenfield Boyce is her name. I would highly recommend reading the article or listening to there's like a radio clip too, because I did not include everything in there. I just included like the biggest things in there, but like there's a lot of really good quotes and like stuff explaining how other things work. So I would recommend it even if you saw this video. And yeah, be nice to each other. Do your homework. It's finals.